I've made a lot of sewing mistakes. Some were just dumb and others thoroughly confused me. But I've also had some breakthrough moments where things just clicked. Today, I'm sharing brutally honest advice on what I wish I knew when I started. Let's dive in. Understitching is a game changer. I love to line my garments, even casual outfits. I will line them because it's just so much easier to finish off the neckline and the armholes if it's sleeveless. But I hated when the neck lining would constantly be flipping out. It looked so unprofessional. No matter how much I pressed, it still would flip out. Then I learned about understitching. What a game changer. Once you do this small little stitch, it will keep that lining on the inside and makes everything look beautiful. I have a video all about how to do understitching that you can check out here. Staystitching prevents disaster. When I first started sewing, I couldn't understand why some of my seams were longer than how I originally cut them out. And then I learned that things that are cut on a curve or cut on a bias can stretch out very easily. So if you look at this woven cotton that I have here, if I look at the grain line, if I go both ways, there's no stretch at all. But if I pull it on the diagonal, there is a lot of stretch. And this is what happens when you're cutting your neckline or your armholes. You have this part that's cut on this diagonal here, or what they call the bias, and it has a lot of stretch. So as you're working with it or sewing it, this can easily stretch out, and then you have a neckline or armhole that's much bigger than you want. It looks very sloppy and messy. So the way to get around that is simply to stay stitch that curve, which simply means to sew. Typically you just use a basting stitch right inside the seam line so you cannot see it once you eventually put in the seam. And then that stitch line prevents it from stretching out. So as soon as I cut out my fabric, I do a stay stitch in the curved areas, and then it keeps that where it should be. I have a whole video on stay stitching. You can check out this video here. Choosing the right fabric matters more than the pattern. I still do have this problem sometimes because I do like to push myself in choosing fabrics that I've never worked with, but often you will pick a fabric to go with the pattern. Like for instance, I picked a linen to go with this top that I wanted to make, and the linen fabric was a little too stiff and was slightly uncomfortable for me to wear, so I never wear that top. So it's very important that you're carefully choosing the fabric that goes with the look and the pattern that you want. So you don't want something that you, perhaps you want a dress to be flowy. You wouldn't pick a cotton that was very stiff. It's just not going to look right. And if you're just not sure, hold up the fabric, drape it over your shoulder. I put it around if it's going to be a skirt to see how it drapes and falls, and that will help a lot to help you determine the right fabric. But a lot of it also is going to be trial and error. Like I said, I just bought a rayon challis. I haven't worked with that a lot, and it has no stretch in it, so I have to think very carefully what pattern I want to match with this fabric. Grainline and stretch direction are non-negotiable. I once was cutting out a lining fabric for one of my work dresses, and I had some trouble with, I didn't have that much fabric, so I'm trying to align the pattern pieces in different directions, and I realized that the lining only had stretch in one direction. So then when I put it together, you always want the stretch to go across your body. It really doesn't matter if you have stretch from the top to bottom, because you don't really need it to stretch there. So unfortunately for this lining, I had the stretch going up and down, and there was no stretch, side to side where I needed it, and it was a real problem. So it is very important to pay attention to your grain lines and also on fabric, you have to determine whether it's a two-way stretch like this was, it's only stretched across the fabric, or if you have a four-way stretch, and then you can be a little bit, depending on the type of fabric, you can be, switch your pattern pieces around if you have a four-way stretch. So it's vital, so always pay close attention to how you're laying out your pattern pieces. You probably don't need half the tools that you think you do. I, like everyone else, get sucked in with seeing a fancy gadget online and buying it, and then it gathers dust in my studio. I have a whole video about this, talking about all the tools that are gathering dust in my studio. I find I reach for the same basic tools. I think it's important that you have a really good pair of fabric shears that I do not use for paper at all. And these are very inexpensive shears, but I love them. Also have pins. I do like the pearl topped pins, and I do think quality pins are important. I have some pins that actually came with this set, and they're very inexpensive pins. I never use those, but so I just moved these pearl headed pins on them. So you need that. Of course, a seam ripper. It's quite important that you have a seam ripper, but these are very, very inexpensive. And then some kind of measuring. I think a measuring tape, if you have just one thing, a measuring tape is more versatile, but you can also have a clear ruler. They're both very, very inexpensive, and you may already have one. And then there's the last thing, which most everyone has, is just a hand sewing needle. Most people have one of these in their house. So I think that is your bare minimum, besides, of course, your sewing machine and thread. But you do not need a lot of things. And often you're just gonna grab the same things over and over. I've put together a list of all my favorite supplies. You can get the link in the description below. Pressing is just as important as sewing. Years ago, when I first started sewing, I was impatient and I just wanted to move forward quickly, so I never pressed, maybe didn't even press at the end. But that is a real mistake, because you get a much more professional looking garment when you press every seam as you go along. Because if you wait until the end, some of the seams are very difficult to get in there to really press properly. So now I keep the ironing board very close to my craft room here. And so every seam I sew, I then go give it a quick press, back and forth and back and forth. So it is so vital to do, and definitely don't want to miss that step. The Burrito Method will save you from bulky lining issues. I love to line my garments, particularly when they're sleeveless. It really makes for a nice clean edge at your armhole and your neck. But the problem is you cannot just sew those and then turn everything right side out. It just won't do. It won't turn right side out. And if you just sew your neckline, then how do you get your armhole finished without having some kind of top stitch? Like, it just looks awkward, or putting a bias bonding. I like a really clean finish. Then I discovered the Burrito Method. It seems so weird at first, the way you're rolling things up, but it just allows you to finish both your neckline and your armholes beautifully, and then also be able to turn it right side out. I have a whole video on how to do the Burrito Method you can check out here. Since I've discovered that, I absolutely love it and would not finish my lined garments any other way. I've also put together a free guide on how to do the Burrito Method. You can get the link in the description below. Basting is not a waste of time. We all get impatient and we're like, I'll just skip over that step and move forward. But then inevitably you've sewn it maybe backwards or the wrong place, and then you're using your seam ripper. And I find that, the regular stitches are so small, it's really hard sometimes to get them out, and you risk ripping the fabric. So to do a basting stitch, and particularly for really awkward or difficult seams, it's really a great idea. It does not take that much longer, but you can ensure that it fits right and it's in the right place. and you don't even have to take the basting stitch out, but if you did want to remove the basting stitch, it's so easy to remove a basting stitch. One step beyond that also is if I'm working with a knit and I want to serge the edges, I typically use my sewing machine first. I can use the lightning or zigzag stitch on the sewing machine, because then I can just make sure that I like it and it fits, and I don't have to use the serger at first with it, because once you use the serger, it's very difficult to get those stitches out, I find, and then you're also clipping off some of the seam edge, so then you have less of a seam. It just becomes much more complex. So I will first sew that seam on my sewing machine, try it on, make sure I like it, and then I serge the edges. One extra step, but it really avoids a lot of mistakes. Not all thread is the same. You're tempted to use some, thread that maybe a relative has, like for decades, or you want to stay on a budget, so you might buy some really cheap thread on Amazon, but it's not a good idea. I only buy Gutermann thread now. I want to make sure I have good quality thread. Cheap thread can break easily. It can be tangled. There's lots of problems that you can have with your machine with cheap thread. So in the scheme of things, it's really not that expensive to buy better quality thread, and it's really, really important to do so. The first thing you sew will probably be ugly, and that's okay. We all have to start somewhere. That's why I recommend you start with a non-garment project, such as, maybe a bag, a tote bag. Even if you want to make a garment, I have a video here on a very simple 3-tier skirt. You create the pattern yourself very simply and just based off your measurements. So a project like that would be a really, really good first project. I've also written up all the instructions of how to make this skirt and how to take your measurements. You can find the link in the description below. I also have a video showing how to make 3 easy projects from scraps, and you can check that out. Or you can grab the free written guide, link in the description below. Sewing is a skill that you build over time, so it's okay if the first one is not perfect. The key is to keep going. And if you want to learn more about how I choose fabric for each of my projects, check out this video here. And if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe.